If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello, Internet. I must tell you, one of the perks of my job here at Legacy is I meet these fascinating people. And I meet them before you meet them. And that to me is also another thing. And one of these people I've got here sitting right in front of me, Pat Casserly. And he's from the SAAF, from the South African Air Force. He's got a very fascinating story in my eyes anyway to tell. He was a navigator, I believe. And now I have to ask you, but first let me say to you, thank you, welcome here. We're really grateful for you. Thank you for contacting me. I wish more people will do that. Just write me, get hold of me, whatever, just get hold of me. Let your story not die with you. So thank you for being here. But can you tell me, how did this start for you? How did you get to the Air Force, to SAAF?
Chris, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And tell it's not an exciting story as Laurie's or anybody else's, but it'll help fill in the gaps, I think. I joined the SAAF in 1971. I was born in Port Elizabeth, spent most of my family life in Cape Town, but went to boarding school in Kimberley, so I was spread around a bit. Always wanted to be, actually I wanted to be a pilot, but applied for the Air Force, got accepted, and was in the 1971 January intake. We arrived at the Air Force gym in Valhalla, and then I went through all the not acceptance, the medical tests, etc. Passed them all, and on the selection board, I was asked if there was no spots as pilots, would I become a navigator? And as you learn in the military, you never volunteer. I said yes, and that's what that's where I ended up. From there, in March 71, we went to the military academy for the officer cadet course. That lasted till September. And then in September, I transferred to ATANS, that's Air Navigation School in Easterplaat, and spent the next almost 18 months there doing the nav course. Wings in November 72, I think, and then on to 35 Squadron as a navigator, as a second lieutenant. And I stayed there about just over 12 months, and then transferred up to 28 Squadron Transport in Pretoria, Baardekloof. So that's my military entrance anyway. I stayed in the SAAF till end of 1975. I wrote my commercial navigator's license and moved from the SAAF, bought myself out at the end of 75, and then moved to SAAF Air, where we were navigation officers, come operations officers, come load masters, come a whole host of things with SAAF Air, sorry. And on the Hercules, the L100, the Dash 30s, and they had a Dash 20, I think, which was Buoyant, was the name of the plane. And stayed with them till 78. And then from there on, during my tenure with SAAF Air, a Canadian outfit came across and leased one of the aircraft. And I was asked if I wanted to go along. I was a holder of a foreign passport as well. And then, I said, I'll go along. I'm young enough. And off I went to Canada, well, via the UK, two years in the UK, and then emigrated to Canada in 1980. And that's the limited one so far, anyway, of my experience with South Africa. And after that, as I say, it's in Canada. And then from there onwards, all over the world, Middle East, India, UK, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Bahrain, mainly on the ground side. So mainly in ground services. And I'm now retired and happily so.
May I ask you quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt, I apologize, but I'm fascinated to hear what's the difference between the civilian C-150, the L-100, and the normal ones or the military types of C-150s?
Well, other than it being longer, I forget, I think it was 180 inches longer. I can't remember the exact on the 30. The main thing is a lot of the civilian ones have additional equipment for recording, etc., etc. So they are civilianized. So I forget what the detail was now. It's been such a long time. But certain things, the engines were derated or remodified with a new designation because they had to add something to it. And the cockpit voice recorders, flight data recorders, which the military versions did not have. Our one certainly didn't, that I'm aware of. And that's the basic difference. Other than that, it was a normal Hercules. Yeah. And most of the SAAF pilots, of course, came from the Air Force anyway. A lot of them from East African Airways way back when, but the majority were ex-Air Force. Yeah.
They do look the same though. I remember seeing a few SAAF Air L-100s or whatever, and they really look like a Hercules. They sound like a Hercules.
Yep.
They smell like a Hercules.
Yep.
But now, if I can ask you a technical question, where would the Navigator be in the cockpit?
In exactly the same position as in the military one. You've got the pilot, captain, first officer, engineer in the middle, and the navigator at the back. Yeah. And of course, the SAAF ones were more modern than the military ones. I think the military got theirs in '67, if I recall correctly, somewhere around there. But the SAAF ones were a lot later than that, and newer versions. I did a few trips over to Marietta, Georgia, to ferry them out after they came off the production line. I think I did 2 trips, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Well, one over Christmas, which was not pleasant, but anyway.
So, I've heard somewhere that SAAF Air was acting almost like an espionage airline, and they're still in existence. So I just want to ask you,
I mean, I wouldn't say espionage. I think that they were there to supply the military for sure. You know, most of the flying work was done to and from Grootfontein, actually. You know, they converted, I think it was 4 of them into passenger aircraft, which was unusual, where they cut the holes for the escape routes in the fuselage, and they were loaded, the seats were loaded on pallets, and that was mainly to take laborers from Sumab or Grootfontein area down to the diamond mines in Aronimont. And that was a great time in flying, because of course we had the weekends off in Aronimont, and all we did was clear fishing and beer drinking, I think, and then restarted that on the Monday morning. But there we go. And those were also used as troopers as well. You know, much more comfortable than the web seating that the regular troops had. Yeah. But that was a major modification. It was done in San Antonio, a place called New Braunfels in San Antonio, Texas, just outside San Antonio, Texas, where they did all that. And then they had to get it certified from the South African Civil Aviation Authority, etc. But it was interesting. Also, what SAAF did was, on the commercial side, they managed to get licenses or registrations of aircraft registered. Botswana was one of them. I think Gabon was another, but I was only there from the Botswana side. And we flew under the flag of Air Botswana, tramp steaming through Africa mainly. We were involved in cattle movement from Nairobi up to South Sudan somewhere, into Juba, into all sorts of funny places in Africa that you wouldn't have been allowed to go with a South African registered. So, and then that's when Northwest Territorial came along, and they said, "Do you want to go along?" And I said, "Yep." So I ended up in the Arctic. It was basically that.
Which of the 2 aircraft between the C-160 and the C-130 has the best rough landing capacity or capability?
I mean, the C-130 through its longevity is probably but there was no slouch to the C-160. I mean, the C-160 had great capability because of its high rate of descent that it could maintain. They could do 18,000 foot a minute. So on the dodgy areas like Rundu and Mapasha, where you used to have to go in and circle, to come in at altitude and of course drop like a stone in the spiral descent. The Herc couldn't do that because it didn't have any spoilers or speed brakes, as they call them, like the Transall did. But I mean, although it carried about the same number of people in a trooping mode or paratrooping mode for that matter, it was a little bit slower than the Herc. But I think a bit more versatile, in fairness, than the Herc. In I wouldn't say rough landing, but just general maneuverability. Yeah, no, it's a good aircraft, both of them. And I mean, the Herc continues today. The Transall doesn't, so it goes towards telling its longevity.
I know the Special Forces people always say to me they prefer to jump from the C-160, probably because it's slower. I'm not sure why, but that's what they tell me.
The speed's the same. I just think you've got the wash, the prop wash, and the way the engines are positioned, etc. I've heard that from the paratroopers. The 160 was far better to jump from than the C-130. The C-130, mind you, had had a deflector just forward of the aft doors, so it at least deflected the initial hit of the air when you jumped out, whereas the C-160 didn't.
So in those days, how do you navigate such a big aircraft? What do you use? There's no GPS.
There was no GPS in those days. There was no initial. A lot of the other commercial ones put in INSs. SAAF didn't. We used the Navigator, Mark 1 eyeball, as they say. We had Doppler radar, and mainly dead reckoning on long flights over water was Astro, everything Astro. And later on, of course, they modified it to a MEGA system they put in, which is like similar to the GPS of today, but an older version. It worked off satellites, and some of them went INS, which therefore you don't require a navigator. You've got everything you can do. So, yeah.
I just want to make sure before we start with your story is, what happens if a pilot doesn't fly according to your instructions because he's in command? What happens if you two start arguing on where you are?
I don't think I've had that argument to each other. I don't know what would happen. I think the flight engineer would probably take the fire axe to him. I think, anyway, so it depends if the flight engineer is on the navigator side or not. But there we go. But we became expert coffee makers, because we had a little galley in the top. Yeah, so no, we did something interesting flying, at least, anyway. Yeah, a great bunch of guys as well. Great bunch of guys. There we go. But and then life in Canada was tough. We were based in Yellowknife, and sorry, I went on loan to them, and then came back to South Africa in '78, resigned, and then went over to the UK. So we used to operate the Hercules and tramp steaming through Africa in the summer. Normally it went overseas from Canada in the summer. There's no work in Canada. And then in the winter, we were stuck up in the Arctic, flying rigs, oil rigs from the land to the sea ice. Sometimes as high as 78 degrees north, 82 degrees north, and some very short trips. So one trip I recall was only 32 miles offshore. So you barely got airborne and you were landing again. And then, of course, it was a flooded runway, ice runway. Bloody cold, of course. But no, it worked out well. And that was a 24/7 operation. So we used to first off take all the huts across, the ATCO huts, ATCO trailers, as I say, for the workers, and then build it up and then fly in all the rigs. And we used to assemble the rigs and reverse the procedure in March. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing operation. Yeah. And then in the summer, we normally based it in the UK, and then did all various charters down to Libya and Algeria and Rwanda and all sorts of wonderful places. Lots in the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, and of course those were accessible in those days. So yeah, nothing untoward. And then normally on a backhaul, if you're in the Middle East, we'd go to India and pick up leather goods, and then fly it back into Frankfurt and reposition somewhere else for the next flight. It was interesting anyway.
Do you care as flight crew what you're flying, your cargo? Is it important to you, or if it's just part of it?
Well, it is. I think, particularly when we found out, we did a trip on behalf of a French, and went into a place called Chateau Roux, which is just outside Paris, a military base. Loaded up all these things. Everybody knew what there was, except the flight crew, because they hadn't arrived yet. So we loaded up armored vehicle carriers, and with their missiles as well on board. And we went on a demonstration through the Middle East, and we went to Tehran, we went to Baghdad, we then went to Amman, Jordan, Dubai, Oman, and then flew back through Tehran as well, with all these vehicles inside. And the captain was quite surprised when he went, because we used to put a false thing of boxes along the side, so if you looked in the door, you couldn't see what they were, or what you were carrying. But I think it was the second day, the captain looked back, he said, "Holy hell, what are we carrying to these places?" And it was a French military demonstration team that was trying to show off their wares. Yeah, so, and we flew to Sana'a, a lot of stuff to Sana'a as well. I'm not sure it was in the boxes, but it wasn't vegetables, put it that way. But anyway, but there we go. So that was exciting. Yeah, and I left them in 86, and then went down to Toronto, and that ended my ground phase. Well, that started my ground phase, and this was various airlines, charter airlines from Canada, and then went into the ground services side when most of the Canadian businesses went bust, or the charter airlines went bust anyway. And then
many of you, your non-pilots or flight engineers, navigators, become pilots themselves afterwards, commercial. Have you ever done that too?
No, I never. I got disillusioned with flying. I think had I been a pilot, it would have been a different story. But and I just went into the operational side, which suits the background of the Navigator, basically. And then senior positions in the Canadian Airlines, Director of Ground Operations, and then in the Middle East, in Jeddah, I was with Evergreen International, which was based out of McMinnville, Oregon, which is a strange place, but and we had 5 747s, 2 passengers for Hajj, and 3 freighters on permanent duty with Saudia. So, and running that operation out of the Middle East, out of Jeddah itself. Yeah, that was interesting.
No, indeed, it is. It's very fascinating. That's why I keep on asking questions. But anyway, I'll keep quiet now, I promise.
No, it's
people
okay.
are to listen to me, I assure you, but they don't want to hear me. So
after Jeddah, I left Jeddah in '95. I went to the boring side of the aviation industry, the low-hanging fruit, which was ground handling or catering, one of the two. We take our choice, and we pull the rabbits out of the hat every month to find out who is the low-hanging fruit. Anyway, and then stayed in that mode for the rest of my career. So there we go. That's my potted history, anyway. I guess, if I may, just the 28th Squadron story, and really inspired by Laurie and other people's podcasts or video casts, whatever they're called, about the Op Savannah, in particular the Op Savannah, which read, and I've try to go back to find my logbook, which I can't do, unfortunately. I've moved so many times, it's probably in some pile somewhere. But basically, in the June of 75, we were called into the OC's office. Jimmy Groenewald, he's a colonel, called into his office, and were briefed then by some of the intelligence people, forget who they were, that there was one crew. It was Jimmy Groenewald, Colonel Jimmy Groenewald, Major Ralph Hayton, myself, and I think it was A.O. Willie Buerta, and I can't remember the second flight engineer come load master's name. Hell of a nice guy, tall. Anyway, I forget what his name is. And we were told that we were selected, I don't know why, as the crew to do some secret flights, and it was top secret at that time. Anyway, what we were supposed to do, or what we did do, in fact, is 7 o'clock, and we started this in, I think it was a sort of mid-June, mid to the late June 1975, was took a Hercules. I remember the Hercules, it was 403, because it had the best operating Doppler radar. So anyway, so we were briefed. We were going out, flew up to Rundu just with purely loaded with ammunition. But we had about 17 ton on board. The whole floor was just covered in boxes of ammunition. Got to Rundu, had a briefing there. Didn't pick up anybody then. No, I think we picked up Major General Constance Viljoen. That's right. So we picked him up, then went up to Silver Porto, almost due north of Rundu, about an hour and a half flight. Landed there, offloaded half of the ammunition, and lots of people running around. And some of the pictures that on Laurie's video was, I recognized some of the people. Well, there was shady character. I mean, you saw these guys in beards and camouflage. Oh, we were civilian clothes. We had to wear civilian clothes in a military aircraft. So anyway, got there. Jonas Savimbi was walking about quite with a swagger. I met him on later flights, but never forget the two pearl-handled 45s around his belt, and then. And he had an aircraft there. It was a Learjet, either registered in Belgium or Austria. I can't remember which. I think it was Austria, actually, that used to fly him around. We then got airborne out of Silver Porto, and we had to head north to Ambrise, but we couldn't go direct because we'd get too close to Luanda, not showing what their radar capability, etc. So we did a dogleg almost up to the Zairean border and then hang a left, so to speak, into Ambrise, where we were met by the Mr. Holden Roberto, which was quite funny as well. And there were one or two South Africans on the ground. They weren't as conspicuous as the guys were in Silver Porto, but they were certainly there. Anyway, we offloaded the balance of the armament, and then waited till nighttime. Waited till sunset, so about 8 o'clock at night. So we got airborne in Waterkloof, remember, at about 7 in the morning. So this has been a long day so far. And then went out to sea and then came in through Cabinda, over Cabinda, and then into Zaire. And our call sign was on express permission of the President, Mobutu Sese Seko, clear to land. And then so we landed in Kinshasa. This is a South African military aircraft flown by, obviously, military and civilian thing. Anyway, and there we sat. So this is about 10 o'clock at night. And this was our first. We got a little bit better at it as the month went on. But we then waited there. Lots of activity around us. The Zairean forces were guarding us, on the perimeter in Kinshasa Airport. And then civilian guys, American guys, toing and froing, and we didn't know who they were. They didn't come and exactly say, hello, my name is, and I work for. Anyway, so finally, C-141, the American Starlift arrives, and they taxi quite close to us, turn around, and they start offloading. And this was, I've never seen anything like it. What a mess. I mean, it was, how to put it, it was piles of guns of various calibers, just normally AK-47s and that style, but all different makes, models. And they just put them on our pallets and loaded it into our aircraft. It wasn't very heavy, but it was certainly weren't in boxes. It was just like a bonfire. It looked like a bonfire of guns, and then ammunition and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then these guys, we were also told that 2 people would be traveling with us down, and we did the reverse route. We went back to Embreeze and then down to Silverport and then Rundu and then back up. So we loaded all this stuff up. What a mess. I mean, I've never seen it. It was like, as I said, a bonfire on a pallet, but the bonfire was guns, just of every caliber. Anyway, ammunition as well. And these 2 guys introduced themselves. I forget what their names were now. And they were coming with us. So we were told by the intelligence guy in Waterkloof at our briefing was to blindfold these people. Anyway, we didn't. I mean, they were obviously CIA. They didn't know. The intelligence guy didn't want to know where we were going. But anyway, to cut a long story short, they joined us, and we did it in reverse. At we got airborne Kinshasa, so we would be in Embreeze at daylight. So just at daylight. So we got to Embreeze at daylight, offloaded this. I just can't describe it. It was absolutely appalling. And I'll tell you a story on the next flight. Anyway, did that. Flew on to, picked up then an armored personnel carrier. I forget what make and model it was. Put it in back, and then went to Silverport, landed Silverport, offloaded everything, this mess of arms and this personnel carrier, and then on to Rundu, refueled, and then back to Pretoria, and washed, rinse, repeat 2 days later. And I think I did. I was going on leave in early August, so I did seven or 8 of those flights. And as I said, long days. We used to leave at 7 in the morning, get back probably 2 o'clock the next afternoon, absolutely beat, sweaty, etc., etc., etc. And then we finally got coveralls issued to us without any insignia on, and that's what we used instead of civilian clothes. Destroyed our civilian clothes, but anyway, yeah. So that was very interesting. Obviously CIA. Obviously, saying we are supporting you, but I mean, I don't think anybody wanted that support. In a subsequent trip with Holden Roberto in Embreeze, and he came and introduced himself, and he said, "Come, let me show you." So we go, and I don't know what the designations were. He said, "This is how they help us, the Americans." He says, "There's a 40mm mortar, but they give me 20mm shells." And and it was just a complete delay tactic from the American side. It was absolutely amazing. The 141s, they were coming into Kinshasa, originated in Patrick Air Force Base in Florida, Ascension Island, Kinshasa, and then just reversed the route. And over there, I don't know where they went after Kinshasa, but we had no issue, no hassles, no issue in actually executing the flight. Once we were stuck in Embreeze, because the Stellan organ rockets of the 122mm, they were just to the south of Embreeze airport, and the shells were just landing in what would have been our takeoff path. Anyway, we were stuck there for about 2 hours till they pushed them back, and we got airborne and then continued. And no, it was very, very interesting. And we never had any problems with being intercepted or nothing like that. It was just, we got lost once, and that's my fault. But coming into Silverport, we were to the west of our track, and the sun was coming up, of course, and we just couldn't. There's no radio aids, nothing like that, and we were carrying 2 armored personnel carriers. And the troops to operate them. I think they were FNLA troops, I think. Anyway, there were about 4 of them in the back, and we called one of them up and said, "Dude, there's the railway line, hang a right." And anyway, so we were diverting to Rundu at that stage, and he said, no, turn around. And anyway, we found the place. Because, of course, it was very, very hazy in the early mornings with the sun low in the sky. It was absolutely, and all it was dead reckoning. there wasn't much time to do any astro work or anything else. You just had to rely on your radar, your Doppler, which gave you ground speed and drift and dead reckoning and tide as well. This is being awake for 24 hours by the time you get that. So it was interesting. But other than that, I mean, I believe so. We did. I certainly did 7 or 8. I can't remember how many. So we used to take 2 days rest and then rinse, wash, repeat, the same thing. And varying in armaments, meeting different people. We finally did meet Jonas Willem. He disappeared for, I think, our middle part of the flights. And Holden Roberto said we met him. And in Kinshasa, it was just nobody came near the aircraft. Nobody. And we just sat and slept and waited for the 141 to come in. And the armaments that came off from the Americans did improve, I must say, after the first. Not by much, but they did improve. Looked like the quality. They were in boxes at least. That was the main thing. And then my last flight at the end of July, there were definitely a lot more South Africans presence in Ambriz. We heard a story of the 5.5 guns, one 5.5 gun being offloaded in Ambriz. I can't verify that, but it seems to me that later on there were quite a few up there. The Houts and the super gun that the South Africans had. It just helps, I hope, fill in the gaps between Ops Savannah. That Ops Savannah was a long time in the making, because I think the official one only went in September or October of that year. So in my involvement, I went on leave in August to write my civilian navigator's exam. And there's a reason why I was on leave. So I was off for almost 6 weeks. And when I did come back to the squadron, guess what? Sent straight up to Grootfontein, and we did all the shuttles into Celle, which was the big airport that we operated out. Not a big airport, but the airport that we operated out of throughout the Ops Savannah time frame. Yeah, and my record, how to put it, my recollection of Celle was completely deserted. We did go down, but the amount of Cuban cigars lying around there in these rolls, I mean, there were thousands of them. So we happily took them back to South Africa for those of us who smoked. So that's the story that I wanted to tell. It was quite interesting, but it goes to show that, I mean, the South African and the Americans were involved long before the actual Savannah actually broke off. Yeah, and as I say, by the time I got back to the squadron, we were flying in our regular Air Force uniforms. Then the trippies were still in that horrible green stuff with tackies or whatever it was called, and we got issued with sort of like a camo coverall, and then I think into October, November, nobody cared anymore what you wore. You just wore your regular uniform and off you went, or your flight overalls or whatever. Yeah, so that was exciting.
Well, I've got a few questions for you, if you don't mind.
No,
I was making notes in the background. I'm really glad that you talk about this, because we seem to think that Savannah just happened. Suddenly the guys at Tucson got called up, or people got called from the units, but there are things happening in the background which I don't really think we've ever really touched upon. So I'm really glad for your contribution. But I want to ask you, were you people in any way armed when you were flying there?
No, I mean, I never, no. I don't even think anywhere of the crew was armed. We may have had an FN or R1 in the back, but that was it. We had a lot more other weapons in the back, of course, that you could have utilized, but I don't think any of us were trained to use one, to tell you the honest truth. I mean, other than your basic training when you shot about 10 rounds or whatever, that's the only training we had. So, and that was 4 years previously. No, not at all. We did carry lots of people though. I'm not lots of people, ones and twos and threes and fours, and I can't even remember their names. They were very secretive, didn't want to say anything. A lot of them, when we carried a lot of people out of the Silver Porto area, not necessarily on Breeze, but Silver Porto. And, they just sat in the back, and I'm sure it's something to do with the recce's or whatever. There was no conversation. It was hello, goodbye, in very, very heavy Afrikaans accents. So you had to know where they were from. But the Silver Porto was, I don't think it was the main one. It was just a staging area. I think everybody spread out from there. I think it was the safest airport to land in. It was pretty close to Rwanda, which I believe was in an MPLA control at that time. So we were doing a fine line, but we weren't hassled by anybody. And what amazed me in Zaire, never even saw a Zaire. Never even saw. They just put this cordon around us. We waited for the other aircraft to come in. We transferred the load, and off we went. Yeah. So no, it was seamless, so to speak, but it was interesting nonetheless. And except for that incident in Ambrise where we were held up to take off, that was the only time we've seen anything fired in anger. We only saw fired in anger. I may forget the occasional thing, but it was so long ago. But it was very interesting anyway. And I believe from one of the South Africans in Ambrise was saying that they were going to attack Luanda, but he was very reluctant. Holden Roberto was very reluctant to take Angola or to shell it, which they could have done in the latter stages apparently, but he didn't want to shell Luanda at all. Because I guess because he didn't want to, but and this was in July, end of July, so they certainly had the ability to, but I guess they really screwed it up when they made that attack and were repelled. I think they could have done it in July, but I think when they went in August, or so the books say August or September, they tried to get there, and they were repelled by the MPLA. So it's the story of a
fascinating story. But I'm still looking for the people who were there, because they had to be rescued, the South Africans, by one of the frigates.
Yep.
Which is actually worth a movie itself in the story, which I told.
Yep.
But Roberto didn't listen. He wasn't listening to any advice. And so they started their attack late. A lot of things went wrong there. But now, talking about things going wrong, did you people have any briefings on escape and evasion? Should the aircraft go down, or any cover, any legend?
No. I think at that stage in Angola there was, how do I put it, reasonable intelligence on what the capability of the NPLA was. There was certainly no radar. We know that. And I think our confidence was in an intelligence group. There was a military airport right close to the northeastern part of Angola, which they told us to stay away. So it was Luanda over here, with this place up here, and we just went up the middle of it and hang a left. So and we did exactly the same coming south. So it was we didn't have any briefing on where we were to divert to if we had a problem. It was amazingly lackadaisical, to tell you the honest truth, but I'm sure there was methodology behind it. The intelligence in that the first, I mean, it was kind of it was so simple to do, although probably in latter life, if you weren't a young 21-year-old, you'd probably rethink the whole. But Colonel Jimmy Groenewald was, he was the OC of the squadron and flying this mission. So it was, and he certainly didn't have any qualms, and maybe he had been briefed, but we certainly weren't briefed at all.
Is there any technical reason why the Americans couldn't with their C-141s? Why they couldn't go and do it? I mean, it's a massive aircraft. It's a very big thing.
Yeah, well, it certainly would have differed. It wouldn't have been able to go into Advertise for sure. Advertise was too short, and in like a swamp. It was built in a swamp. I'll never forget, because one of the main troops that were guarding us in Advertise were not FNLA. We saw very few. A lot of them were all ex-Portuguese or Portuguese mercenaries, that mainly blacks. But they were very, very competent. You could see they were. I think they were almost guarding, Holden Roberto's personal guard. No, the 141, and it would have. Oh, I doubted if it would have been into Silver Porto at all. I can't remember now, but I think it could have made Silver Porto. But again, the Americans didn't want to be involved. They needed a patsy, which was South Africa, that size, to implement their worldwide whatever they wanted to do. So, yeah, but again, what I saw from the American side was, and as proved with the Holden Roberto said, was yes, we're giving you arms, but as I say, 40 millimeter, 20 millimeter shells, whichever the case, to be seen to be doing something and actually doing something was, of worth. But I mean, our supply, the South African supply to the Angolans, or the Swazimbis and the Holden Robertos, was genuine stuff. I mean, ammunition, vehicles. I saw boxes of machine guns, heavy machine guns. So I wasn't an army boy, so I don't know whether it was a 20 millimeter or. But anyway, but there was heavy equipment being moved up. Mainly small arms and vehicles and other stuff, but the South Africans were true to their word, so to speak. I think the Americans were a little bit economical with the truth.
Well, they were just after Vietnam. I think there was a bit of a feeling against them getting involved in Africa.
Yeah, I'm sure there was.
Got their asses kicked quite badly, and they lost 58,000 men.
Yeah.
Mind you, the Vietnamese lost more than 1 million men, and the French before them lost about 80,000 men. So their figures were not that great as we think. There were no contact between the two crews over SAAF and the US.
I can't recall very little. Certainly not of the flight crew. Maybe the loadmasters. I can recall chatting to them, where you come from. Oh, that's where we found out. Other than that, they were pretty stum, as were the people we carried. I mean, we always had somebody on board with an American accent, be it 2 or 3 people, and they all got off in Advertise. They didn't move from Advertise. They didn't come down. One guy came down to Silver Porto, but if I recall correctly, but mainly all stopped in Advertise. And I think they would have gone back, overland or whatever, or with a small aircraft back to Kinshasa. So I don't think they're stuck around there long. But very, how are you doing? Where you from? Blah blah. Yeah, sort of idle chit chat. Nothing of any nothing of any content.
So there were no professional airman type of thing where say, come and look at our aircraft, or nothing like that.
No, it was so quick. I mean, everybody was involved in transferring that, because getting my timings wrong. They used to come in at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, Kinshasa time, and it took us about 2 hours to transfer the load. And we had to get to Advertise just on first light, so there wasn't much time left, for any niceties, if you know what I mean. But I mean, I can't recall actually having a conversation with the flyboys, the front end, just the load masters. That was, everybody was all hands to the pump to get this thing loaded and our aircraft on its way. I can't recall actually talking to any of the Americans, or except the load mastering guys in the back end.
Now, there is something which I always ask of your air crew, for your Ray-Bans. Navigators, would they also be qualifying for these aviator Ray-Bans just to impress people?
If you can't have full wings, you may as well have the Ray-Bans. Yeah. Yeah. No, the standard issue Ray-Bans. Yeah. And the watch, of course, as well, was also a dead giveaway.
Yeah, we should talk about those watches as well. I understand it's these fancy chronograph type of things.
No, never had one. Never had one. No, I'm talking about the Air Force issued standard one, which was quite a, I forget what even make it was now, but it was quite a standout item of kit. But interesting enough, in my case, and I'll go back to my training in air navigation school. I was the only South African on the course. There were two Rhodesians, Richard Airy and Paddy Morgan, to Rhodesian Air Force. So they went back to fly Canberras in Salisbury. Richard, unfortunately, was blown up in his aircraft. The bomb armed, it's a propeller arming mechanism on the Canberra, and I guess it pre-armed itself, and the moment they dropped it, it exploded and then took the aircraft out, and he lost his life, unfortunately. Paddy's still around. He finally left Rhodesia, went down and joined the South African Air Force and stayed with them, and I believe he's moved overseas now. I think he left South Africa, I forget when, but he left the Air Force in South Africa and he's living somewhere in Europe, I believe. That was the strangest thing, that I was only South African.
Yeah, but it would have been an interesting class with your English accents, which is fantastic, I must tell you. And the Rhodesians, of course, too, they speak us marvelous English. And I say that as an Afrikaner, you know, there's no way I can speak like that. I have my horrible accent and I'm quite proud of it. But I know the surface is people who can make themselves comfortable anywhere. So I need to ask you, did you get some food rations or rat packs or something to go with on these long flights?
Yeah, we had the caterers. If I recall, the officers' mess produced the food and was delivered to the aircraft, and that was A-OK. If I recall correctly, yeah, the officers' mess, the Body Club officers' mess, produced all the food. So it certainly wasn't a rat pack, but it sustained us, that's for sure. But we were, other than Kinshasa, we were very short term on the ground. Rundu was just a refueling stop normally. Rundu and depending, well, sometimes we had to offload and reload some things, and all the others were just an offload and get up and go. And Breeze, same there, and Kinshasa was just a waiting game until this 141 came in from Ascension Island. And they were always, in fairness, they were always on time, reasonably good on time. They made it. And yeah, that was it.
So you never got fuel from Zaire?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, we had to. Our last refueling point was Rundu. So we had to carry, and her can normally carry about 21 ton. And we were very heavy out of Rundu. Max, in fact, sometimes in excess of max all up weight. I remember crossing the river there, Kunini, at very, very low treetop height sometimes to get it up and running. But we had to carry sufficient fuel to get to Kinshasa with all these stops. So our payload was reduced, if I recall, by about 5 ton. But we were still very, very heavy, I remember. In fact, I think in one time, if I recall correctly, our max takeoff was 135,000 pounds. By the way, the L100 is 155. So there is a difference there, but it's a heavier aircraft as well. Anyway, and we had to do what they call emergency military power, which allowed us to increase our takeoff weight. I forget what the amount was, but it was about 5,000 or 6,000 pounds heavier than. And Rundu was hot, of course, even in June, July, and not much of a long runway in comparison terms. I forget what the length is, but certainly no more than 8,000 foot anyway.
Well, it's one of the most beautiful sounds in the world, those elephants when they start up. I get like wonderful when I hear them in any of their formats, on any of them. They're just fantastic sound.
That must be your policeman's background coming out when you were trooped up to Vic Falls, etc.
Yeah, the Vic Falls guys were long before my time. But yeah, we had a running battle with the Air Force guys. I do sometimes say to them, I think they were very unfair, especially the flight engineers walking around there and their stupid little torch. And they look here at the ceiling and they make the sign of a cross and they shake their head and then they look very, very, very concerned. And then, what's going on? The engine isn't, this wire and, no, they put the fear of God into us. But what comes in must come out. So even if you guys had like good food and I suppose a lot of water, things like that, coffee, also toilet facilities on a C-130.
Not very good. Not very good. You had a urinal, which obviously we exited the aircraft, but you did have a portable toilet, which wasn't the easiest to use. So I think it was a little bit of fussbait all the time.
Yeah, I've heard a story of SAAF guys actually opening the rear door at the ramp and standing there in just releasing themselves outside of the aircraft. You think that ever happened or just a story?
I think it's just a story. I think it'll be well, both the Transall, the C-160 and the Herc had a facility that you didn't want to use unless in the worst of circumstances. So no, it wasn't, and the same as the L382, the L100, whatever the SAAF ones. The first one to use it cleans it was the what was the mantra. So if you and everybody would have you used the toilet, everybody's fuss baiting until somebody did it, then everybody rushed. But anyway,
well, it's not that easy to get out of overall anyway, and
no.
I think it takes some time. But just to get back to the flights, you were not trying to impersonate another aircraft or anything. You were using your navigational lights, your navigational radar, all those things.
Well, we kept in touch with on the high frequency HF radio with I don't know who we were talking, Pretoria, maybe even Silvermine. So they knew where we were. We had regular reports to make. All airborne reports, all landing reports, and we had the ability to patch through on a telephone, etc. So no, then you, but we didn't talk to anybody in the local areas, not even when we came into land. We did a visual, reconnoiter. This was nobody to talk to, or we didn't want to talk. The only guy we talked to was Kinshasa Tower. So it is an international airport. But our call sign just shut everybody up. Express permission of the president of Zaire, etc. Get to land.
Yeah, and you of course happened to be the brother-in-law of Holden Roberto, I understand.
Yeah.
So there was a family connection there. But do I understand correctly, when you were landing inside Angola itself, you would not ask the control tower for permission, you would just come in?
At that stage, there was no control tower. There's nobody to speak to. No, we would do a visual around the airport and then come into land. I think that number one, to see if there's any other aircraft in the area. The second reason was to make sure that the people that when you landed, the people on the ground knew who you were. But I think there was, and I hope so, there certainly was contact between who we were talking to on the HF radio and the local people on the ground. Yes, they're airborne, expect them at this time, etc., etc. But we honestly didn't have any hassle at all. Nothing. Amazingly so. I mean, it was just, as they say, it was just like a cakewalk, except of the area that we were operating
in. Yeah, you call it a cakewalk, but I think it took some guts actually to come in a strange country where, there's a civil war going, you're coming in blind almost. You don't know what's going to happen. I mean, those guys can start shooting at you. I know with the USAF, the Air Force had some kind of a transport thing going, I think in the 50s, early 60s in Africa. They moved thousands and thousands of people, and the air crew got beaten off quite a few times. You know, they would land and people would just attack them and beat the hell out of them, and these things happened. Did it ever occur to you people that you can end up in a Angolan jail or places like that?
I think in the back of your mind, you knew that if things went wrong, they're going to go horribly wrong, and you're pretty far from home. But I just, it certainly was in the back of your mind, but you didn't even think about it because, you know, you only think about what can go wrong when things do go wrong, you know, and what the hell do I do now? But basically, no, I'm sure it was there, but it certainly didn't come to the fore. I mean, even when these 125, 122 millimeter rockets, the Stellan Organ rockets, were landing, I would say probably about a mile away from us on the edge of the runway. Even the Portuguese guy said, no problem. He says, you know, you can hear when they're coming in close to you. And of course, it was very muddy around there, so there were no explosions. The rocket just went into the mud and didn't explode. So, you know, there weren't boom, boom, booms all around you. It was just that you just didn't want to take off into this hail of rockets. And so once they repelled them and pushed them back, then we were clear to take off. So I forget what the range of those things was. It must have been about 20 kilometers, I think. I can't recall. But from your previous videos, podcasts, yeah. So.
Yeah, well, if one of those salvos hit a C-130, which is loaded with fuel or not, I think you're dead. There's no way you're going to survive that.
Well,
You'll explode.
I mean, in latter life, a very good friend, the SAAF guy, was, I think, a Strela or some. He was operating for the diamond company, I think, and it hit his aircraft, and they all perished. Dorian Schoen and his crew, and then my old Northwest Territorial guys. They weren't flying from Northwest Territorial. They were flying for another. I think it was an Angolan company, but in a Herc, and they got the whole. I knew the engineer and the captain quite well, the Canadians, and one of their whole half of the wing was burnt. They managed to get the aircraft down and actually put the fire out, but they lost a whole half wing of the aircraft, and they had to do a wing replacement in the middle of the bush. In Dondo, I think it was. And the insurance company just said you should have written the bloody thing off, even cheaper. Anyway.
Well, you've been in aviation all your life. I mean, and you obviously had an exciting life flying, and even afterwards. I mean, this is just, it's in your blood. So if there's some young man or young woman listening here to us today, and they want to, you know, get a career in aviation, but what would you tell them?
Stay away. Like everything, I think any business in the world, any has evolved, and where you know the Ray-Bans and big watches, etc., must have worked in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It is a dog eat dog, and aviation is probably one of the worst industries to go into, in my view. You know, gone are the days when you had, you know, like my compatriots in South African Airways used to spend 18 days flying a year. That's all they worked. Sorry, a month. You know, they go over to Rio and spend 5 days in Rio, then go up to New York, another 5 days in New York, you know, go to Sol Island, spend a couple of, not that it was a brightest, Sol Island, spend, you know, etc. London 4 days, you know, Hong Kong 6, Perth 3. Those days are gone. You go to a place and 12 hours later, you're back up in the air again, back home. And it's become a commodity more than anything else. I think, and after COVID has shown us that it is not a desirable job, anything in aviation. I mean, look at all the airlines now in Europe suffering, British Airways cancelling, EasyJet can't get going, all the delays that you see around the world, not only in Europe, but around the world. You know, they can't get the people back in. You know, who wants to wake up and start shift at 5 o'clock in the morning and have an angry Pat Casserly shouting at you that he hasn't got his seat? Are you going to charge him £20 for his extra luggage. It's just not worth it.
Now I'm
So
going to
stay away.
I'm going to ask you a question which you don't have to answer. But I've heard of quite a few Air Force guys, and not only the SAAF, other Air Forces as well. We became part of a Mile High Club. Now, was there such a thing ever going on in the SAAF, or the guys just talking perhaps more than what they should?
It's very, very difficult in the SAAF. Yeah. I don't know about other airlines, which well, I'm sure it happens, but it's never come across my desk, so to speak.
Yeah, that's fantastic. No, I must say, I really enjoyed this one. You know what?
I'm just gonna add something on our trooping stuff. We did a lot of the police troops up to Rhodesia, if you recall. We went Bulawayo, Wankie, Vic Falls, and then into Salisbury, where we normally overnighted, and we loved those trips because the first thing was we used to take margarine back from Rhodesia back to South Africa. Don't know why margarine. I hated the stuff, but we could take it back. The other thing was the officers' mess, particular officers' mess in the Serum. They had a TV, and of course in South Africa you didn't have TVs. So that was a positive. But another one that amazed me about the Rhodesian is that Peter van der Bijl, I think he was a minister. Anyway, he was stuck in Vic Falls, and he said, "Can I get a ride?" And of course, the captain said, "Sure." So it was three of them. It was a Transall. I can't remember Transall. Anyway, so we took him into Salisbury, he thanked us, and then he sent a message, "Come and join me for dinner tonight." So we did. The whole crew was invited to his big, massive place, because he was a farmer, I think. And he had this massive place in Salisbury. He sent official cars to get us, and away. Now, would that happen in South Africa? You know,
I must tell you a story about what happened. I wasn't there, of course, it's before my time, but this actually do happen. It did happen. I heard it from quite a few policemen from the older guys. And they said they went to Rhodesia, and how it happens is the two groups would meet at the Air Force. The ones coming back home would meet at the airport or the air base, and the new ones get over aircraft, they get into their vehicles, and they just leave. So the main thing there was you would get your camouflage uniform as white as possible. You know, the more faded it is, the greater boss off you are. And so you do that. And even in my time, you would wash your uniform and jig, you know, or something like this. Like, you have to understand. So you can really see the two groups. The one were almost with their camouflage almost white, and the others are like sparkling new.
Yeah.
But there's one fellow, for some reason, I don't know, must have been a constable who's not listening. He decided to put a new uniform on for some reason, even though he was going home now. And so the two groups met up, and they, "Hey, how are you? You don't know each other from somewhere." And he started talking to the group arriving. And in those days, they didn't do a training beforehand. They did it in Rhodesia itself. That changed later in my time. Mm-hmm. So when the other guys got on the aircraft and he wants to go home now, they said to him, "No, what's your story?" And he says, "But guys, I've been here 3 months already." He says, "No, look at your uniform, man. We don't have time for this, jokes. Come.
Off we go.
At the end of the day, they actually fought, really. They thought he was just playing with fools, so they grabbed him and handcuffed him. And they grabbed him up, and he went another 3 months. And when he didn't arrive in Pretoria to get his pay, his danger pay for 3 months or 4 months, he was away already. They then realized he's missing. And so the general said, "Okay, well, since you're there now, you can stay there." So he had the border duty of about 7 months.
Wow. Wow.
But have you ever, these young men who would get onto your aircraft to be flown to war, what was their outlook in life? How did they look like to you? Serious or concerned or happy-go-lucky?
I don't really. I think there was an excitement. I don't think it was. I think there was angst, if you know what I mean. But I think, it was, all of us were young then. You forget, you're full of piss and vinegar at that age, and you know, I wouldn't say it was an exciting time is not the word for it, but at least you're sort of going into to put where you're being trained into practice, basically, you know, without shooting at a dummy on a range. So I think the excitement was there. I think nervousness was there as well. But I mean, nobody was dragged screaming and shouting to the aircraft, that I can tell you. No, they all behaved extremely professionally. And that was particularly the paratroop guys. They were very, very well disciplined, more so than the regular army troop. Or the policemen, for that matter.
Policemen were a bit quite drunk when they arrived, I would say, especially the older men. Not myself, of course not. I just want to say that. But the paratroopers are a bit weird if you think about it, because they never actually landed with you again.
No, they don't. Well, no, if you're on a trooping mission, a paratrooping mission, no. But funny enough, I only did 2 of those, and that was in the Bloemspreid area on the C-160, if I recall correctly. And I did about 5 or 6 static drops, and nothing in Angola. Of course, I was not involved in the real war, if you know what I mean. Just initial stuff leading up to within Ops Savannah, because I'd left by end of the year, end of 75. Yeah.
Have you ever heard or seen a paratrooper refusing to jump?
No, never heard of it either. No, I know that they get the murin when they're dropped in the wrong place. I know that for a fact, because one of my colleagues made a mistake and dropped them in the wrong place, and there was hell to pay when they got back to base. But anyway, but normally the flyboy. Normally, when that happens, the flyboys are buggered off back to Pretoria.
Which is perhaps a wise thing. They do tend to drop you in the wrong place, but you know, that's a good thing too. It confuses the enemy.
Yeah.
So we don't mind that.
Yeah.
But this was fascinating to me. Thank you once again. I wish
pleasure.
to say to everyone here, just call me, get hold of me. I will get back to you. It will take a week or 2 before we can record. I always apologize for that, but these days we are booked ahead so far. And these more stories which has come out today in this episode, this is the type of thing we really want to hear. You're not going to find it in the history books easily. If you find it, it will be one line, but you will never really know what happened until you look at the people and you spoke to the air crew themselves. So thank you very much. We really appreciate you, Pat. And I say again to the rest of you, come and contact me, talk to me if you feel you have a story. Even if you don't feel you have a story, and then you actually do have a story. Because we want to hear from everyone. And so until we meet again, God bless.
Thank you very much, and my pleasure, Chris. Thanks a lot. You're doing good work.